Whatever comes, I won't complain. For all my hope is in your name, and now your joy awaits my praise. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. When I was down, you brought me out. You set my feet on higher ground. So here I stand. You are my God. Your faithfulness, my solid rock. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done. I won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. And as we lift our hands up, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. And as we lift our hands up, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. Come on, we sing. I give thanks. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done. I won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. nothing can stand against, and I choose to praise, glorify, glorify the name of all names, that nothing can stand against. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will. Speak to me when the silence steals my voice. You understand me. You understand me. Come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. I believe, but help my unbelief. You understand me. You understand me. Help me reach the faith that's underneath. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. Come on, church, sing with me. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest.
me, your money. Let's talk, shall we? Ooh, look, your package came today. I can't wait to find out what we ordered. I'm sure you can't either. Look what I found. Remember this? A penny saved is a penny earned. Hello? Anybody in there? Echoey. Just look at them all. We're rich. I don't like the word hoarder. I prefer the term saving visionary. Who needs a 401k when this buried treasure could be worth something one day? And this. Yes, this. Worth every penny.
Good morning. I love the fact that somebody actually bought that camera thing, that Camel. Like, that's a real lamp. That wasn't like CGI. That was like real. That's an actual thing. You can purchase it. And if you have it in your house, I'm not picking on you. I was just merely pointing out that you could buy that. Hey, my name is Chris Causey. I am so glad you are here today. I'm the lead pastor of Encounter Church. And this is like one of my favorite times of the year because Easter is just a few weeks away. And for Christians, as for pastors, that's like such a big deal, kind of what you're looking forward to. And it's been a message I've already been thinking about and kind of living in. And I am so excited about that day and what's in store for us and the two services that we have and just the power that I think that God has for us and the picture that God has for us and the way our lives can look from Easter is one of those things that really is transformational. And Easter is not one Sunday, it is the one day that affects how we live every single day. And so just know, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Easter. It's a great day for you to invite somebody if you've been thinking about inviting them to church. But the week before that, we have our egg drop, which is another thing at the church that we're kind of in the midst of preparing for. And so this is one of those things that we kind of plan for really almost year around. And what's been kind of wild for us is watching it. Last year we saw this happen. Initially we thought it was a fluke because of the way we hadn't had it in a few years. But then when we opened up registration this year, it kind of blew up again. And we had to actually, we had to put the brakes on our registration, which was kind of a little crazy. So what we discovered last year that we saw play out again this year is this has become like not just like a community kind of thing. This has become a statewide recognized event. I mean, like we unleashed registration very intentionally, concentric circles, like very methodically, and very quickly, like we saw people registering for this event who are not even in this state. And we were like, okay, hold up, like this is not Disney World, okay? So like one, and I know it's free, but still, like, and our team is like, oh my goodness, what is happening? And we started seeing some people sharing the link outside of kind of the area that we kind of intended it to. So we had to do some quick kind of brake pulling so that this thing can get out of hand. Because last year we saw 8,000 people register in about a day. Okay, less than a day. Like, I mean, this thing, if we wanted to make Disney World with Easter eggs, I think we could, okay? We're not, but it's just crazy. But in order, anyways, to prepare for what is probably thousands of people at this point, even in the midst of us keeping the brakes on how we're rolling out registration, in order to pull off an event for thousands of people, it does take about 100 plus people. And so many of you have already stepped in and said yes. And I want to say thank you because the event wouldn't happen without you. Not just your generosity, but your actual physical presence at the event. We still have a few more spots that we need you to say yes to. If you're kind of on the fence, you're like, I don't really know. I don't like people, and I don't even want to go public with the fact that I don't like people, and I really don't like children and Easter eggs. They're like my two least favorite things in life. Then you know what? We have the perfect spot for you. It's in the back, guarding the back entrance to the field where you get to run off children who try to sneak in, and you get to guard Easter eggs so that no one gets them. Like, there is literally a place for you No matter who you are, no matter your skill set, no matter kind of like, even if you're like, I've never volunteered. Our team has made it really easy for you to have a win and help us collectively as a church to win. So right after the service, if you're interested, we will have we'll have some iPads out available for you to sign up in the various spots. And if you're watching us online, you can check that out at encountereggdrop.com/volunteer. There's a place for you. And for us to create that space that we want to create, we need you. So with that said, I move on to what I'm really excited about today. See how I just kind of geographically, calendar-wise, just walked it? Today, we're going to continue a series called Money Talks. It's something that we kicked off at the beginning of this month, and Dallas and I, in the course of a couple of weeks so far, has essentially kind of big idea has said this to you, that money management starts with me management. That if you want to get a control or a handle on your finances, the very simple answers that we often start with, which is like, how do I go make more money? How do I do X, Y, and Z? Like the starting point oftentimes is me, not something external. That if we learn to control ourselves, if we learn to be content in our circumstances, that those two actually are the most powerful levers to pull when it comes to money management. And that's why before we jumped into practical, before we jumped into principles, we just wanted to say, hey, starting point for this is personal, is me management. And I think most of us would agree, if we're being honest, that the hardest person to control in your life is not your significant other, it's not your kids, it's not your coworkers, it's not the internet trolls, right? It's not the other side politically. The hardest person in your life to control is you. You have been present in every single derailing, destructive decision you have ever made in your life. You and me. We're not just accomplices. We are sometimes the criminal. And so this is why money management starts with me management. But what I want to do over the next couple weeks, because this is a 2-week conversation I want to have, I want to talk about how do we go pro in our finances. And when I say go pro, what I really mean proverbially in our finances, Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. Because Proverbs, to me, is one of the most fascinating books in what we would call the Old Testament or the Jewish scriptures, because the book of Proverbs initially was written not so much as like collections of sayings, but its original kind of origin was a father speaking to his children. It was a parenting manual, a preparation manual for royalty, because this was a father named Solomon who was preparing his children to take over for him when he passed away. And so one of the wisest men who have ever lived, definitely had some issues in his life, but from the recorded sayings that we have, clearly very wise, has a desire to help his children be prepared for life and for leading. And he gives them succinct statements that if you spend time reading Proverbs, you begin to kind of marvel at truly the genius of them. Because some of them are really obvious and some of them almost don't make sense. But the more you think about them, the more you ponder them, the more it starts to come into focus, and you realize, holy moly, this is brilliant. But there's a thing about Solomon that I think is really relevant for this series, in that Solomon, still to this day, adjusted for inflation, would be one of the most wealthiest people who have ever lived, period. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, like adjusted for inflation, Solomon's walking up with his robes and his smelly hair, because they didn't have shampoo like we do, like up into that room, and he is flexing far more than even those guys, because he is categorically in a different level of finances and wealth. And what Solomon understands, that maybe some of you can understand, is that if your kids grew up in wealth, if your kids grew up around a very comfortable financial kind of life, that is not enough to guarantee that they know how to handle, manage, create, or preserve wealth. I mean, this is not the world I live in, but I read broadly and spend a time in a lot of different worlds. And one of the kind of dominant conversations that happens within the ultra wealthy class, like the 0.01%, like one of the discussions that those financial advisors often have with their clients is really around wealth transfer. How do I set my kids up for success and not crush them by our wealth? And this is where Solomon is. He understands just because they grew up on the vacations and in the palace and in the second house does not mean they know how to manage the money that creates that life. And so it's no reason like that. His understanding is the reason why he spends a lot of time unpacking finances throughout the book of Proverbs. In fact, there's almost 100 different proverbs dedicated to money and how to manage it because he understands. And so Solomon's money talks to his children serve as the basis for what we're going to talk about as the next 2 weeks. And hopefully in the course of this, some of you I know are already slaying this. You could probably be up here and teach a better message than I'm going to teach this morning. Some of you, this may be something that you've never really unpacked before. I was reading some kind of the backdrop of Rihanna's kind of financial empire. Like I said, I read broadly. And so Rihanna, 16 years old, kind of hits the scene, born in Barbados, and blows up. I mean, financially, she is like instant pop star in what plays out, and the money starts to roll in, and she hires, at age 16, she hires a financial advisor who is kind of tasked with overseeing her money. And as that plays out and she's getting older, she eventually ends up in a place of practical bankruptcy. She has no more money left. And so she sues her financial advisor. And as it went through the kind of the courts and the lawyers got involved, one of the things that he said, kind of, off the cuff, but in a little way that was kind of a jab at Rihanna, he was like, I didn't think I needed to tell my client that if you just spend your money, all you end up with is things and you don't have money left over. And eventually Rihanna received kind of a payout and a settlement. And so what he said that was meant to be a jab at Rihanna, I think is actually quite insightful when it comes to finances. That none of us were born on planet Earth with a little accounting manual in our hand. None of us were born innately with an instinct to do Excel spreadsheets, right? Like we're not like birds who just woke up and were born into this world, cracked into the egg, and intuitively knew how to fly. Like finances aren't intuitive to us. They have to be instructed. And oftentimes what happens in the realm of finances is that they're not taught, they're caught. You see what your parents did and you internalize it. And then you find yourself in adulthood trying to navigate a world, whether you have less or more financially, and you're watching social media and you're trying to keep up with everyone who's trying to keep up with everyone. And eventually you find yourself fat, like flat on the ground, just like, oh my goodness, I surrender. I'm drowning in debt. And so none of these money talks is about condemnation. It's about liberation. Because his statement about Rihanna was both insightful and mean. What was insightful was like, no, the 16-year-old who in the blink of an eye was making millions of dollars thinking you were managing it, did not understand. No one had sat her down and said, hey, this is how finances work. So my goal is hopefully in helping us to go pro in this conversation is also to give you some words, if you're slaying it at home in the way you do finances, to maybe give you some words for your conversation with the next generation or for a coworker who you're watching make some of the choices that you made that were so painful for you financially when you were younger. And so that's kind of the hope, is I think everybody can get something out of what Solomon says. The starting point is, he makes this statement in Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. What you see is this is kind of a commonality in how Solomon would teach his children. He would usually present two different pictures. Sometimes it was implied, like this passage, and sometimes it was really explicit, but it was usually two camps. It was the wise and the fool. And he would use different synonyms. He would say the wise, the diligent, the disciplined, the prudent, the discerning. But they were all kind of synonymous words that meant that collective group of the wise. And then over here, the fool, the sluggard, the lazy, the stupid, the fill in the blank, all synonymous words for this camp. And sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, like this, where he says the plans of the diligent, he's being explicit. Here's this one camp. Leads to profit. As surely as haste, implicit over here, this camp, leads to poverty. And the thing that I want you to notice is that both are acting. The plans of the diligent lead, there's an action. They are executing a plan. Surely as the haste leads to poverty. The fool over here also is acting. They're acting hastily. They're acting without a plan. They're reacting to life. And what Solomon sets from the very beginning in a lot of the discussions around Proverbs is like, son, there are two different ways of thinking, and how you think about money will shape how you live out your life financially. I mean, if you ever want to deep dive, I mean, go into like some of the YouTube videos around people who have done very successful financially and building empires and managing their resources. And even if you don't understand all the things they're talking about, one of the things that becomes very quick, because I grew up really poor around in a really poor community, and what I very quickly realized in watching and learning and kind of digging into that world was that, man, these people think differently about finances. They think differently, and they do differently around finances. And Solomon's like, son, just because you've grown up in a palace doesn't mean you should take this palace for granted. That just because you've lived comfortably and well doesn't mean you will continue to live comfortably and well. That it falls onto you. Money management is me management. And this idea of planning, I think, is really critical to the conversation. We have a different word for this. It is, I mean, for married couples, okay, this is, if you've been like, man, what do I do to turn up the heat in my household? I'm about to give it to you right here, okay? So if you hadn't taken any notes, you haven't written anything down, here it is. Babe, I need to talk to you about the budget. And you just cue the music and the playlist because you bring up budget and that's where it happens, right? Like, no. Like, budgeting is stressful. Budgeting creates tension. But budgeting is the plan that they're referring to here. And that for many of us, I think budget is that five-letter word that we think doesn't need to be in our life, or maybe if it's in our life, it is the Bible, how we live our lives financially. And what I want to do is just kind of dig into this idea of the ABCs of budgeting, but because it's so much better to talk about how not to do it, which is oftentimes how we do it, I'm going to give you the ABCs of bad budgeting. Okay, so this is going to be like the inverse application of this thing, because I don't think our problem is a knowledge problem. Most of us know enough about certain things. It's that the implementation of it is where we get in the way, or the obstacles while we're trying to apply it get in the way. And I'm going to assume that most of us have a common kind of general sense of what budgeting is, of like figuring out where your money's going to go. What I want to do with the ABCs of bad budgeting is give you the obstacles that get in the way oftentimes of us implementing the general knowledge we already have. Okay, the first one is in this realm of ambiguous. When we set out to budget and it's ambiguous, it is not clear at all. It is not detailed or delineated. And I'm not saying that your budget needs to look like some corporate accountant sat beside you and spelled it all out down to the penny. But I'm just talking about the general thing when we talk about groceries and you're like, how much do you spend on groceries? You're like, yeah, I do, right? That's the ambiguous I'm talking about. When we don't have it defined. And the reason why is because human beings, the reason this derails us is because we are very optimistic over and under estimators, right? Like we are so optimistic in our estimation, right? Like if you've ever exercised and you go and you get on a treadmill and you run really hard, like a 15-minute mile hard, and you're sweating, that was a joke, and you're sweating profusely, and you get off the treadmill and you're like, I just ran for 30 minutes, and then you go and you're like, I'm going to treat myself with a piece of cake, and I eat that cake because I earned that cake because I burned that cake, right? And then you notice you don't lose weight, you gain weight, and at first you're like, oh, this is muscle mass. I've heard muscle mass is heavier, and a pound of muscle is heavier than a pound of fat, which does not make sense, but I'm sure that must be why I'm gaining weight. And then eventually you gain more and more weight, and you start to say, I think that's a lot of muscle I'm gaining. And then you go and you realize maybe it's like a fitness watch, or maybe you start paying attention with the treadmill and the estimated calorie burn. And you're like, I don't get it. I burned 150 calories. And then you go look at the back of the label and you realize that the only way you can treat yourself is with half an Oreo. But you ate a half of a whole bag. Right? Like I came across this startling stat. Like these are all people who are running a marathon. Okay? Did you know a pound of human fat has enough calories for the human body to run a marathon? So a pound of fat is roughly 3,300 calories, 3,300 calories, because of how fat is dense and how calories and chemistry happens, and it's amazing. And it takes roughly around 3,300 calories for like an average build runner to run a marathon. So like now when I'm looking in the mirror, this has actually been helpful. I'm like, you know what? I'm not 20 pounds overweight. I just got 20 marathons waiting to be unleashed, right? That's what it really is I'm seeing on the inside. But the reality is that none of us would look in the mirror, see 20 pounds, and be like, there's 20 marathons in that. Like, we don't estimate very well. We see this in the lottery, right? Like, the average person, like, you watch when the lottery gets above $1 billion. And you start, it's just a surge of people buying lottery tickets, and everyone, the statement when they're getting interviewed, because it always becomes a news piece, is they say this: I figured someone's going to win it. Why not me? That's our overestimation ability. That's our optimistic estimation showing up. Because the odds of winning the lottery is take a bathtub, fill it with rice. Now, fill up 63 other bathtubs with rice. Take one piece of that rice, paint it gold. Give it to someone to go hide it in one of those 64 bathtubs. And then you walk into the large room with 64 bathtubs filled with rice at the very top, and you're blindfolded and told, walk blindly through this room, stop, and pick one grain of rice from the bathtub. That is your chances of winning the lottery. But hey, somebody's got to win it, right? Because we overestimate. And this is not just... It's not just in our food, it's not just in our calories, it's not just in when something like this plays out and we're like, oh, I can win it. It's not just on how much time we spend on our phone, because we all hated when Apple and Google rolled out the screen time feature where it actually showed you how much time you were doom scrolling on social media. Right? It's not just in generosity, because there was this fascinating study I read where when the average person was asked how generous they are, they tended to give a number that was twice of what their actual accounting record showed. Now, I don't think people were lying when the study was done. I think people overestimate. We're optimistic. Oh, of course I'm generous. I'm sure I get $5,000 last year. Or I give $200 last year. And then it comes back and it's like, actually, you give 25. Because ambiguity works against us, not for us. And another way that we play out this ABCs of bad budgeting is by breaking it. Right? We maybe move past the ambiguity and we actually sit down and we detail it and we spell it out and we're like, this is what we're going to have. And this is what we're going to spend our money on. Here's our grocery bill. Here is our electric bill. Here is our subscribing to Netflix, Disney Plus, Peacock, and Paramount, and Roku, and all that. That's my cable-ish bill, right? And we walk through it all, and we have a budget, and we feel really good because we got a spreadsheet, and it feels like progress. And then we break it. And this is where, I've been on the side of couples enough. And please, I am not, if you've ever sat across from me and we've had this conversation, finances, I am not talking about you. I've done this enough that what I figured out is what I've kind of recognized, and you can kind of see this, is there's two types of people who break budgets in relationships. Okay? There is the one who breaks the budget by paper cut. Right? Man, I had a hard day, Starbucks, Dunkin'. I had a hard day or good day, I'm going to celebrate Starbucks, Dunkin'. Right? Or, you know what, like, that looks good, and Amazon just told me everybody buying this is buying this, so I'm out of the group if I ain't buying this with them. And at no point does it ever feel big. It's not like, it's just 15, 27, Target, where there is an implicit rule. If you walk in the Target, you must walk out with $100 of stuff that are 2 items, right? Like, you just walk in, and you nickel and dime, and you paper cut your budget to death. There's that side. And then there's the other kind of budget breaker, which some of you maybe room with them, or maybe you're married to them, and that's when they come home and they announce they bought a boat, or a truck, or signed up for a timeshare, right? Or put a down payment on a business that they think is going to be big, or invested half of your savings in crypto. They're the ones who break the budget the other way, not through paper cuts, but full Assassin's Creed. One swoop and they're gone. And I've been in the rooms where both are complaining about the other and their tendency to break the budget. But the reality is both of them are murdering their budget. How they're doing it, the weapon they're using is different, but both are the murderers. And it's like, Pastor, tell us which one. I'm like, you're both wrong. Like, because here's the thing. Breaking your budget eventually leaves you broke. You're not breaking your budget. You're breaking you and your financial health. And this is ultimately where I want to pull those people to and to say, hey, let's zoom out, because here's the beauty. When you can get a budget and you can rally around keeping it together, and you're like a team, you can actually use a budget as a path to freedom. Or the budget is going to be the witness for your demise. And it's in your hands. You're in the driver's seat when it comes to your budget. And the final thing, which is, if you're noticing, there's a crescendoing, growing kind of movement in this. You can be crushed by it. You move from ambiguity, you get some detail, and you define the budget, and you get it clarified, and then you start to break it. And if you keep breaking it, eventually you end up broke. And not just broke, but crushed. Because there's some financial, mathematical implications that play out, right? 57%, I saw this recently, 57% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency with savings. Think about that, right? Car tires go flat. Kid gets hurt, goes to the emergency room. You lose your job. You get sick. The washing machine breaks. Refrigerator goes out. And all of a sudden, something that you weren't planning for, something that you were not anticipating, gets thrown into a system that's already precarious because you've been breaking that budget over and over. And eventually what happens is that this throws you into a place called debt. Because now you've had to put that emergency room visit or that washing machine on a credit card. But because you financially are not living in a budget, you don't have, right? Notice this, the plans of the diligent lead to profit. What does that mean? It means that the diligent, who are disciplined, determined, they're focused on the budget that they have, actually have a budget that at the end of the month has margin in it. That's what profit is. It's margin. It's when what you, after you've paid out everything that needs to be paid out, you still have something left. That margin in a business component is called profit. And so the ambiguity moves to clarity, and then the clarity moves to conflict, and you end up breaking it, and eventually you get crushed by it because this $1,000 emergency hits you and you're not prepared for it, and you go into debt for it. But the problem is you're living with a system that does not even have margin in it, so that $200 payment that you need to make to the credit card, you don't have $200 set aside in your budget. So you make the minimum payment. And interest rates keep climbing, and credit card companies keep inching up their interest rate. So to the point now that it is very possible that inside of your wallet right now is an interest rate of 30% of more. So you spend $1,000 on an item, there is a 30% premium you are paying on that item that you're not even going to touch because you don't have the margin to dig into it. And Solomon understood this process. He understood this path. This is not a your thing. This is not a my thing. This is not my parents' or my grandparents' thing. This is a human thing. We do dumb things with money. And before it was dollar bills, it was other things, like salt. Did you know, random Jeopardy moment for us here, that the word for salary is rooted in the same word that we get the word for salt? The reason why is because there were periods in the Roman Empire where Roman soldiers were paid with salt. That was the currency. And you know what Roman soldiers did? They did dumb things with salt. Because we all have this problem. Which is why Solomon ultimately said, look, son, I need you to understand this. Right now, I am the ruler, and I rule. And you think you will rule. But in reality, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. He gives them this crazy image that would almost not even fit our box today. That the borrower is slave to the lender. That debt, at the end of the day, does not give you freedom. It takes away your freedom. And he's like, I want you to avoid debt if at all possible. Because it's you think in the exchange that you're getting something that's going to help you get something that you want, but in reality what is actually being taken from you is your financial freedom. And so he knows the progression. Proverbs 22:7. The borrower is a slave to the lender. And I even was like, because this was not, Solomon didn't speak this in English. He actually spoke this in kind of an ancient version of Hebrew. So I went back and I was like, okay, maybe slave's a little harsh. That's an English word. Let me go into it. And so it just kind of was working through the actual original phrasing. And it's like, no, he wasn't. He was delivering the statement with a really heavy image. He's like, to the boy who thought he would be king, he was warning that he could one day be a slave. That's a heavy hit. And he said that, but that's how you end up getting crushed by it. Right? And if there's any action steps that maybe for some of us that we take away today, the starting point might be just budgeting. And budgeting with margin, getting really clear. For some of you, it may be rallying and saying, hey, you and I are not the enemy. You and me are a we are the team, and we're going to beast this budget together. And we're going to do this with margin in our lives so that we're not crushed. I mean, if this week taught us nothing financially, it's like, man, things can be, I mean, two of the top 3 biggest banks in banking history collapsed in the past week and a half. I mean, there is no security and promise and guarantee that life is going to be good and great and grand. You and I don't have to know that there is an emergency coming down the pipeline. We don't have to know what the emergency is to know that there is at least one coming. And so maybe for some of you, if you've got a budget and you're starting to live by it, great. Push margin in so that you can start to save and set aside some money every single month for an emergency fund. I told you about my horrific dental experience that I had weeks ago where I had no clue that I would walk into the dentist that morning at 9:30 and walk out at 4:30 and have a bill for $3,000. No clue that was going to happen that day. That was not on my bucket list, okay? But the reason that didn't derail my life is because our family lives with margin. We had money set aside because I know a car will break or a tooth will break or a bone will break or I will break. Something is going to break. And by living with margin, it doesn't take away the hit that you have in the moment when the bill is handed to you, but it does take away the stress. Because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you need this budget more than you've ever realized. Because when you're in a paycheck to paycheck situation, having a budget and sticking to it can actually be the way that you have emotional breathing room. It's the way you're not crushed by stress because you know the money you're bringing in and you know where you're telling that money it's going to go. And ultimately, the reason is because God desires freedom for us. And here's the thing. This debt issue, if you're doing this emergency fund, and you start, maybe for some of you, you may drift into debt, but the realization you'll never drift out of it. That for some of you, it may be that you start to look at the credit cards and the spending and the debt that's piling up. And for you, with an intensity and a focus, say, we are done living in a place of being enslaved to these credit cards. We're done. We're going to start to dig our way out. We're going to start to do the work to get out. Because you fall into debt, you do not fall out of debt. But in the course of being in debt, there will be falling outs. And for some of you, this may be your action step, is to say, let's circle the wagon, let's do this. Let's get out of debt. Let's move to a place of freedom. That maybe that's the money talks that you need to have. The goal in this message series is not for me to talk to you. It's actually to give you the conversational points to have this conversation with yourself or with your roommates or your significant other or with your kids or wherever you need to have this conversation with. And the reason I want to push you into that is ultimately is because I realize what God desires for you. And this is where I think for some people it gets a little tricky because some of the baggage that people have even with religion is that there is a camp out there that says, man, God wants you to be healthy and wealthy. And that is not what I am saying. I'm not saying that God does not want you to be healthy. God does not want you to be wealthy. But his end goal for you is not, that is too temporary. And that is too limiting. That is too low of a bar for you and for me. If he'd have wanted health and wealth as our end goal, Jesus would have come down as like a nutritionist and a CrossFit, like literally the first CrossFit instructor. Okay? Thank you. You got that. I appreciate it. Right? Like that would have been how he rolled in. But that is not what he did. That is not how he showed up. And he didn't come down as like Susie Orman or Dave Ramsey to deliver financial freedom for you on a radio. Like, that's not how he came to rolling in either. But he is a good father who desires that his children walk in freedom and in truth. And the reality is that when we break our budget, when we live with an ambiguous plan, we eventually end up broke and we're crushed and enslaved by debt. And the life that was meant to be an overflow out of us starts to inflow and get stagnant in us. And we are trapped and our lives are limited by it. So, I already told you in the course of this message, you found out that like I care about Rihanna's financial history, that I care about random advice that the 0.01% of financial advisors give to their kids. But another actually really passionate topic of mine that I'm interested in is California's hydrology. Like the study of California's water supply and its history. I don't know why, okay? I'm sure there's a counselor who helped me figure out all this, but that's not the point of today, okay? The point of today is to recognize that, did you know that like California, especially if you take a map, this is really awesome. There is a dividing line in America that you can look, that because of the Rocky Mountains and weather patterns, that creates the eastern side of the U.S. has an overall surplus of water, while the other side, the western side of the U.S., has a general deficit in water. You can actually see this on a satellite image. One side of the U.S. is green, one side of the U.S. is brown. Except for a small portion in the maps that are sometimes green, and those are cities where they have literally orchestrated against Mother Nature an ability to route water to places it normally isn't. Like LA is a desert, and it is yet the second largest city in America. So how do you pull off building a city in a desert? One of the ways you do that is through reservoir systems. So California has this extensive reservoir system that captures water coming from the snow, from the Sierra Nevadas, and from the rainfall. And so these get piled into numerous reservoirs, large lakes scattered throughout the state of California, some that they've built and that they control. And this is the second largest one, called Lake Oroville. Now, Lake Oroville was in the news last year because it's the second largest reservoir in California. And yet, from this picture, you see quite clearly that if this is your second largest water supply, you might be in trouble, right? And so Lake Oroville was at about 20% of capacity a year ago this time. It was getting really, really, really low. And this is why you had the governor come out and say, hey, I want to encourage people. He was giving them directions around how to take showers and baths, and it became kind of this thing. He tried to start a movement of like taking a break from showering. But we all know if you have teenagers, like that is never something you ever want to encourage ever in human life, right? Like you want to multiple showers and lots of deodorant regularly, applied hourly, okay? Like that's just a thing. And so naturally, this thing did not kick off. It did not grow and spread. Hence, this situation right here, Lake Oroville gets down to about 25%, 22%. But what's been amazing is in the last few weeks, for those who are like me, who've been passionately following along with the water levels in California's reservoirs, you know something extraordinary's happened from the snowfall to the rainfall, that now Lake Oroville doesn't look like this. Lake Oroville looks like this. And like this. It's now close to 80% full. And no doubt, if it keeps playing out the way it's playing out, this thing will be at record levels soon. And while I was looking at all these pictures, just kind of marveling at the amount of growth in the last year, I started thinking about you and me. And the fact that if you were like, why is finances so important? It's because that God desires for you and I to look like this in our lives. Not like this. That the invitation in following him is that we would be people whose lives overflow, who live from a place of abundance, not just financially, but collectively overall. That we'd be people who walk in freedom. And that for many of us, in all kinds of different areas of our lives, but especially in our finances, this is what happens if we just drift. This is where you end up. You never drift into this or this. And while I was sitting there marveling and allowing that image to kind of be my prayer for you and for me, like, God, let us be reservoirs that are full, that are filled with life, giving life. And I started working on this message, landed on this one. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. And it's like, the wise and the fool have two different ways of thinking about money. But in processing and letting it percolate like it does, I wrote down this statement. This realization hit me in working through all these Proverbs. I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, Chris, you are building wealth. Like, you're building wealth, Chris. Like, did you know you are building wealth too? Every single person in this room, every single person listening online, you are building wealth. Maybe you don't feel like it. Maybe you don't see it. And this is where the insight hit me. Because the question is, whose wealth are you building? You are making choices to build someone else's wealth when you go into debt. Someone else is profiting from that 30%. When it says that the wise store up, but the fools gulp it down. The fools were enriching the marketers who were selling those goods to them. The wise were storing it up. And it was just like, oh my goodness, why is God so interested in this? It's because he realizes you're building wealth. But most of us have never sat down to think about or realize that we spend a lot of energy building someone else's wealth. And guess what? You don't get to enjoy theirs. You don't get to benefit from their wealth. Your world and the world does not get better through building their wealth. All your desires to give and to make a difference and to help lift people out of the stuff and the stuff that they get stuck in that as a church we rally to do. Like, I've never met a person who said, man, I don't want to be generous. I don't want to make a difference. I don't want my life to leave the world better. But the reality is that we rob ourselves of doing those things when we keep building up someone else's wealth. And maybe for some of you, today is the day that you realize you are building wealth, and it's the decision that you go home today and decide and commit that I am done building someone else's wealth. That you need to break up with Chase or Capital One or Citi or some payday loan site. That maybe for you today is a decision where you put a flag in the ground and say, I am going to start building something different. And that if you rally around this by itself is not enough. But what this does do is sets us up for next week's conversation where that image of a reservoir takes on a whole new meaning. Because I believe God is interested and making sure that you and I walk in financial freedom because he understands the downstream effects of what happens when we upstream have that place of freedom and overflow. And the world can literally be different because of it. Because at the end of the day, money management is about me management. And now, we get to say based on what Solomon has said to us today through his money talks with his kids, what type of me management are you going to employ? Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for that, just the way you care. I'm so grateful that you genuinely care about our lives and the details of our lives, Jesus, that you came to give us life. You came to forgive us of sin and to conquer death in order that we would live life abundantly, and that you care about our relationships, that you care about how we live our lives, and that you care about our finances, because you have a bigger vision for our lives than even the ones we have for ourselves. That you have a bigger story that you want to tell through our lives than even the story that we want to tell. That Jesus, so often our failure in dreaming is not we dream too big, but it's that we dream too small about what you could do through us, and especially in the realm of our finances. And so I pray that today this would be a catalyst for people who need to be provoked, catalyzed, that there would be couples who start to write different financial stories for their children by the way they live their lives and the choices they make. That there would be someone here who is single who lets this penetrate deep, and that their world starts to reorient around your truth. That, Father, regardless of stage and age, that even as teenagers and kids, that we would see how critical money management is for our own lives and the lives that you want to build through us. And thank you that you're a God who tells better stories than we can tell. And that even today, that you're open to taking the pen. And so help us in the areas of our lives or with our whole lives to offer up the pen to you to tell a greater, bigger, more significant story than the one that we can tell on our own, Jesus. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. Man, I want to thank you for being here today. And we get to close out with a song today that it's kind of like if you've ever mixed concrete, you pour in some solution, then the water comes, and then the water just something magical happens with that powder. Today, this song is kind of like the water to the message is powder, right? That I think some things can really cement into our lives and our hearts. That for some of us, maybe you grew up poor, or maybe you've moved into wealth, and the life that you've kind of envisioned for yourself is like no longer the life, like I thought it would be better, more fuller than this. Or that you're sitting over here kind of walking through just the crushing pressure, and you can't even imagine there would ever be a day where you would have overflow or surplus. That for all of us, no matter where you are, that we'll unpack it more next week, but there is a God who tells amazing stories through our lives when we offer up our lives to him. And that for us to be able to just to stand together and to sing together this declaration that there is a story I'll tell. It may not turn out the way I want to turn out, but when I hand the pen to God, he can write a story better than what I would ever tell on my own. And that for us to, with hope, not just in our finances, but our life in general, discover the invitation today that what Jesus did 2,000 years ago was not limited to what he did 2,000 years ago, but that it still has power to transform our life today. And so I want to invite you to stand as we close out today with a song that, quite honestly, is one of my favorite songs. That I listen to this song frequently. I pray this song frequently. It's a song called The Story I'll Tell. And I hope you let this, maybe if you don't have enough faith for me to know I've got faith for you today, I want to lend it out to you, and I'll sing it on your behalf. That there's a story that he can tell if we let him.
down through the years. Look on this moment, see your hand on it, and know you were here. And I'll testify of the battles you've won, how you were my portion when there wasn't enough. And I'll testify of the seas that we crossed, the waters you parted, the waves that I've walked, singing, oh, singing, oh,
Wow. I love that song. I love stories. And I think about my story being a 44-year-old man who, for 25 years, I tried to do things on my own. I'm like, give me the praise. Look what I did. Look at this. And I look back over the last 20 years. I'm like, wow, the times that God showed up when I wasn't enough. And I think back on those moments, and just all that testifying goes to Jesus and the God that he is, how he provides, how he sustains, and how he has led me through my life. And anybody who can tell me anything good that I've done, that's not me. That's all him. The bad stuff that comes out, there's still some Dallas in there. But I just give all credit and glory to God for everything. And wow, Melissa, you sang that well. Awesome. So a couple of things. As Chris mentioned, if you want to help out with the egg drop on April 1st, you can sign up when you walk out. There's some iPads that you can choose which area you want to be involved in or however you want to help out. Also, tomorrow night is men's group, and tomorrow night's a special one. It's at 7 o'clock, and I've been told that tomorrow night is food and games. It's going to be competitive, and it's a potluck. And this is me for the first time telling my wife that I need a dish for tomorrow night, which I'm pretty bad about. So, but it's going to be awesome. We'd love to have you 7 o'clock here at the church. And we hope you have an awesome week and look forward to seeing you back next week as we finish up our series, Money Talks. Take care and God bless.